Jungles are extraordinary places, although they cover less than 7% of the Earth's surface and are disappearing at a devastating rate of 30 million acres each year. Tropical forests are home to an estimated 50% of all living things on Earth. So of course these jungles still have their secrets. There are creatures we have yet to discover, large swathes of dense landscapes still unexplored, tribes not yet documented, and ancient treasures buried below the ground. Let's look at some of the mysteries that have been uncovered in the dense wilderness. Number 15. The Costa Rican Spheres. Costa Rica may be famous for a number of reasons, but you may not know that it's also popular for having a large collection of almost perfectly round stone balls. To learn more about these stone spheres that can be found all across the landscape of Costa Rica, we must travel back to the 30s. At that time, the United Fruit Company was in search of new land to begin their banana plantation. They found what looked like the perfect location in the Diquis Valley, which was located in western Costa Rica near the Pacific Ocean. But when the workers began to clear the dense jungle lands, they found something odd: stone spheres. It doesn't sound too strange, but let us explain. Some were only a few inches in diameter, but some were huge. In fact, the largest spheres measured as much as 7 feet in diameter and were as heavy as 16 tons. But where in the world did these spheres come from, or did they even come from this world? It was obvious that these spheres were man-made because rocks didn't just exist in such uniform shapes. Locals quickly began wondering, and many myths developed to explain the stone spheres. For example, some believe they were brought to Earth by, you guessed it, aliens. Others believe that they were linked to the lost continent of Atlantis. The scientific study of the stones began in the late 1930s and early 1940s. Since then, about 300 stone spheres have been found across the country. Although many of the stones are not perfectly round, they are surprisingly smooth, and scientific measurements revealed that many of them were close to being perfect spheres. But the toughest question to answer is why these stones were made. What was their purpose? No one knows for sure. Number 14. Eels that hunt in packs. When darkness comes, electric eels emerge from South American river bottoms in the Amazon rainforest to attack their prey with up to 860 volts of electricity, enough to kill a person. Now scientists have revealed that these snake-like fish don't always go for it alone. In fact, they hunt in packs similar to wolves, orcas, and some species of tuna. The finding, a first among electric eels, is set to kickstart new studies to investigate when this social predation evolved among the animals. Douglas Bastos, a biologist at the National Institute of Amazonian Research, who first saw a group attack in 2012, was shocked. Usually the eels, which can grow as long as a broomstick and weigh up to 20 kilograms, prey alone at night, targeting single resting fishes, he noted. This behavior is unusual not only for freshwater fish, but particularly for electric eels. Bastos observed the attack on an expedition while searching for endangered sea creatures in northern Brazil. 2 years later, he went back for a closer look. Camping alone in the middle of the Amazon, a 5-day journey by boat from the nearest city of Altamira, he filmed hundreds of electric eels in groups of 10 repeatedly attacking small tetra fishes on the Uriri River, which is a tributary of the Amazon River in northern Brazil. That must have been some sight. Number 13. The Nazi Hideout. A mysterious refuge among the vegetation of Tequendama Park in Argentina's Misiones province is thought to be the remains of a secret World War II hideout. Archaeologists were looking closely at 3 dilapidated buildings in Argentina's jungles in 2015. Why? Because among the artifacts discovered, there was a porcelain plate labeled "Made in Germany" and 5 German coins. That, however, is not the end of the story. Everyone was surprised to learn that these were actually Nazi-era German coins. According to the expedition's team leader, Daniel Chavelzon, the small cluster of buildings was just one of many sites planned during World War II, because even the most dedicated Nazi needed a backup plan. Chavelzon explained that the Nazis were working on a covert project to provide safe havens for top leaders if things went wrong. As a result, they built these inaccessible sites in the middle of deserts, mountains, on cliffs, or in the middle of jungles, such as the one where the researchers ended up. The buildings were clearly designed with security in mind, with some walls measuring up to 9 feet thick, according to the BBC. So were they ever put to use? They say it's highly unlikely for a very dubious reason. Argentina's then President Juan Perón had an open-door policy allowing Nazis to resettle in the country. Archaeologists note that if Adolf Eichmann, the man who engineered the Holocaust, was allowed to live happily and freely in Buenos Aires, the chances of other leaders opting for jungle life were pretty slim. Number 12. The Panamanian gold frog. Finding a frog in the jungle may not sound unusual, but the Panamanian golden frog is pretty cool. According to The Guardian, the world first learned about the little golden frog in a 2006 documentary. The frog was not only poisonous, but it also had a clever way of communicating: semaphore. Researchers filming the frogs for the BBC discovered that the areas where the frogs lived, in mountains, streams, and deep within the jungle, were extremely noisy. Other frogs couldn't hear the usual croaks and ribbits, so these little guys developed a complex system of waving their arms, twitching their legs, and stamping their feet to communicate. Isn't that cool? Unfortunately, according to the Smithsonian, they are critically endangered. Even as the BBC was filming, the spread of a chytrid fungus was decimating the area's frog populations. Fortunately, researchers were able to save a small number of the little waving frogs, hoping not only to find a cure for the disease that was driving them to extinction, but also to increase their numbers and repopulate the wild. Number 11. The fascinating Pink Lake. Consider the following scenario. It is 1802 and Matthew Flinders, a British navigator and cartographer aboard the HMS Investigator, disembarks on what is now known as Middle Island. He's in the Recherche archipelago off Australia's south coast, and it's time to start exploring. He shoulders his way through the dense jungle, reaches the highest peak, looks around at the landscape, and is amazed. Well, what he saw was a bright pink lake, and while he was probably unfamiliar with strawberry milkshakes, that's exactly what the color makes one think of. He later described the forest as rose-colored, which is also pretty close. When he and his crew arrived at the lake, which was also very salty, they were able to restock their entire ship with just the salt that had crystallized along the shores. According to Interesting Engineering, Flinders named the lake Hillier in honor of a crew member who died while the ship was docked at the island. And it turns out that the lake's color is affected by supersalinity. Because the water is so salty, bacteria and archaea are the most common microscopic life forms that can survive there. These organisms have a pigment in their cell membranes that is responsible for the pink color of the water, which is why the lake is that color too. Isn't that cool? Number 10. The Lost City of the Monkey God. Archaeologists had been hearing rumors of a city in Honduras's jungle for years. It was sometimes referred to as La Ciudad Blanca, the White City, and at other times as the Lost City of the Monkey God. And in 2015, the city transitioned from myth to reality. Legend has it that the city was founded by indigenous people fleeing the relentless conquest and slaughter brought by the Spanish conquistadors. Expeditions in the early 20th century returned only rumors, and it wasn't until 2010 that a new technology called LiDAR, light detection and ranging, arrived on the scene that progress began. Scanning revealed an extensive city hidden in the jungle, and archaeologists finally hacked their way through the trees to find the long-abandoned ancient city in 2015, according to National Geographic. And what they discovered was astounding. Perfectly preserved and untouched stone structures, pyramids, carvings, vessels and jars, thrones and tables. Archaeological investigation has been slow, but the site has yielded some other results. The untouched paradise was discovered to be home to a number of endangered plants, birds, insects, and reptiles, and Conservation International described it as a refuge for threatened species. Oh, and Douglas Preston, who was part of the first expedition, told The Verge that they discovered something else, a flesh-eating disease that rots off a person's nose and lips first. And yes, the explorers all came home with it, so maybe leave this one to the professionals. Number 9. The City of Nan Madol. Nan Madol is a breathtakingly beautiful city, so it's no wonder that according to Atlas Obscura, Nan Madol inspired H.P. Lovecraft's vision of R'lyeh. Its praise is also sung by the Smithsonian, which calls it an engineering marvel, and the only thing left of the Saudalar are people who were equally religious and cruel, and left behind a city of stone that's still thought to be the home to many ghosts. Creepy, yes, but archaeologists discovered something unexpected within the ruins in 2016, the key to unraveling the mystery of how mankind evolved from simple societies to more complex societies. According to Science Daily, uranium series dating enabled researchers to pinpoint the date of construction of an early chief's tomb between 1180 and 1200, and the size of the tomb is significant as well. Historians say that because they've discovered what amounts to a recent evolution from a simple society to a complex one ruled by a single chieftain over a series of islands and tribes, they still have access to something else: oral history. And why is this significant? It gives archaeologists hope that they will be able to pinpoint the event that caused the Nan-Madol society to reorganize itself into a society ruled by a chieftain wielding shocking amounts of power, and that this will help us understand how societies have evolved over time. Number 8. The Lost Inca Gold. The Inca gold story begins in the 16th century when Spanish explorer and all-around bad guy Francisco Pizarro demanded a ransom. If the Inca brought him a room full of gold, he'd release King Atahualpa. Luckily for Atahualpa, they began collecting the ransom. Unfortunately for Atahualpa, Pizarro was an impatient jerk who had him executed nonetheless. According to National Geographic, this is where the story becomes murky. The ransom was said to be hidden in a secret cave. Well, somewhere. But there is evidence that it's been discovered several times. The first was around 50 years later when a Spaniard named Valverde came into some money, claiming that his Incan wife's family had shown him where the treasure was. He left instructions on how to find it. The guide and map vanished until the 1850s, but it wasn't until 1886 that a treasure hunter named Barth Blake followed up on it and reported finding the treasure. He described life-sized human, bird, and animal figures made of gold and jewels, gold vases filled with emeralds, and the most beautiful goldsmith works that one could imagine. Blake took what he could carry and left, intending to return. Only he vanished on his way back to New York, and all attempts to track him down have failed. So where did he go, and will someone else be able to locate the gold? Number 7. Thousands of Mayan structures. In the grand scheme of things, the Maya were only around 1500 years ago, according to the BBC, but there's a shocking amount we don't know about them, and a 2018 discovery demonstrated just how much we still don't know. Researchers used LiDAR, which allowed them to essentially peel back the layers of the jungle by bouncing laser light off the ground and measuring and interpreting the returning wavelengths. Researchers used LiDAR to map the jungles of Guatemala, and by the end, they had discovered and mapped approximately 60,000 previously unknown Mayan ruins. Archaeologists estimate that going through all of the data LiDAR uncovered will take the next century, and that is essentially 3,000 years of Mayan history condensed to a topographical map. Even at a glance, they've discovered some incredible things. Previously thought uninhabitable areas of the jungle were occupied, and the Maya spent more time and resources building defensive structures than were previously thought. Population numbers have also skyrocketed, with estimates putting the civilization's peak population at between 10 and 15 million people. And also discovered, well, if we can lose a 7-story tall pyramid, we can lose almost anything. Number 6. Phnom Kulen. Everyone has heard of Angkor Wat, the most famous of Cambodia's ancient temple complexes according to National Geographic. But we're not going to talk about it. Not exactly. There was another complex just down the road that was even more elusive. Archaeologists had known about this ancient complex for nearly a century, but it wasn't discovered until 2012. According to the Smithsonian, that's when researchers confirmed the existence of a sprawling group of temples, palaces, and other structures high up on a 1,300-foot plateau known as Phnom Kulen. And it's also when they had the technology to truly appreciate just how large the settlement was. Although it is only about 25 miles from Angkor, this recently discovered complex predates Angkor by about 3 centuries. Consider it a technological blueprint. It contains the same imagery, buildings, and even an impressively advanced water supply that was first partially discovered in 1936. That's when a French archaeologist mapped the ruins of 17 temples, but Angkor Wat was just easier to get to at the time. According to the Smithsonian, Penamkulan was largely ignored except by the Khmer Rouge, who occupied the plateau until 1998. Finally, LiDAR confirmed what the French team had begun to uncover almost a century before. They had discovered the 9th century fortress of King Jaivaman II, the city that would serve as a template for one of Asia's most iconic temple complexes. Number 5. The poison and medicine, curare. When the Spanish conquistadors began exploring and conquering South America, they encountered something terrifying: poison arrows. According to M.R. Lee, Emeritus Professor of Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics at the University of Edinburgh, explorers returned to Europe in the 16th century, describing arrows that first paralyzed and then killed their target. It took around 200 years for European invaders to realize that the native peoples were making a plant paste and applying it to their arrows, and even then, European explorers weren't able to identify the plant until the 1800s. For a while, it was just a poison, but if it was just a poison, it wouldn't be such an exciting find, would it? Now jump ahead to the 20th century with an explorer named Richard C. Gill. In 1938, he and his neurologist began searching for a cure for a neurological condition he had developed after a horseback riding accident in the Amazon. Among the secrets indigenous peoples revealed to him were various recipes for making curare poison, which two Canadian anesthetists realized could be used for a different purpose. General anesthesia was still being used for invasive surgeries in 1942. Injecting the proper curare preparation served as a super-localized muscle relaxant, altering the way surgeries were performed. Curare went from poison to lifesaver in 400 years. Number 4. The Boiling River. The stories were first told to Andres Russo by his Peruvian grandfather. It was said that there was a river deep in the jungle that was so hot that it boiled. It also followed that whatever fell into it would be boiled alive. Scary. Fast forward to when Russo became a geophysicist, and it goes without saying that a boiling river is definitely real. According to National Geographic, Russo decided to investigate whether such a thing was possible. Not only did he realize that it could have existed, but he also discovered the river. The river is 5.5 miles long but boils for only about 3.8 miles. And yes, small animals that fall in are boiled alive. Further investigation revealed that it's a completely natural geothermal phenomenon that's extremely lethal, and one that local tribes have been aware of for a long time. According to their ancient beliefs, the river has tremendous spiritual power, and the vapor that rises from the boiling river carries the prayers of all living things to the Creator. And that's a pretty lovely idea, just don't slip. Number 3. The cure for malaria. Malaria may conjure up images of mosquito-infested jungles, but here's the thing: there was no malaria in South America until Europeans arrived and brought it with them. It was a gift that kept on giving, spreading faster than the Europeans themselves. Malaria had already arrived in the Andes by the time explorers arrived, and in an amazing twist, so had the cure. The bark of the cinchona tree, which native people had long used to treat fever, was the cure. It was only natural that they would use it to treat this new disease, and it worked. It wasn't until much later in 1820 the French scientists discovered how to extract the active ingredient from the bark, quinine. According to the BBC, a popular story claiming that it was a Spanish noblewoman who discovered it could be used to treat malaria has been widely debunked, but one thing is certain: it was a huge deal. It saved so many British lives throughout the 19th century that it was regarded as one of the tools of imperialism that enabled the British Empire to colonize malaria-infested areas such as India. It was not replaced as a malaria treatment until the 1970s, by which time it had saved an unimaginable number of lives, and it had a major global impact. Number 2. Mayan ruins at Palenque. Father Pedro Lorenzo de Lanada, a Spaniard, published the first account of this lost city in 1567. He discovered the stone temples and plazas near the Usumacinta River in the modern Mexican state of Chiapas, which were originally decorated with blue and red painted stucco but had long been abandoned by the Maya who built them. Lorenzo named the massive structure Palenque, which means fortification in Spanish. Palenque, one of Mexico's most visited archaeological sites, is a modern wellspring from which researchers have drawn some of the most detailed information about Maya culture 500 years later. According to experts, it was not large, being dwarfed by cities such as Calakmul and Tikal, and David Stewart of Harvard's Peabody Museum reported in 2003 that Palenque could only support 6,220 people at its peak. However, Palenque is famous for something else. Michael D. Carrasco, an assistant professor of art history at Florida State University, explained that Palenque wasn't known for its size or age, as other sites are much larger and much older. Its significance stems from its naturalistic sculpture, architectural inventiveness, and meticulous epigraphic record. Palenque's wealth of epigraphy, inscriptions, and recorded history has assisted archaeologists in constructing the first timeline of Maya rulers, one that, while impressive, is still a little hazy in places, so there's a lot more work to be done. Number 1. The ancient Inca figurines. The small golden figurines that once belonged to the Incas are so similar to modern-day aeroplanes that they continue to astound researchers even today. The question of whether these ancient forms actually depict an actual prototype remains unanswered as well. The Incas inhabited South America, with the largest tribe residing in what is now Colombia's province of Tolima. For hundreds of years, the area was inhabited, but it was also the site of the discovery of the first aeroplane figurines, which scientists estimated to be 1,200 to 1,500 years old. The Incas may have used them as nose and ear decorations, but the big mystery is why they look so much like modern aeroplanes. In 1969, Emanuel Staub, an American jeweler, gave the winged figurine in his possession to his friend Ivan Sanderson, a well-known zoologist and the head of the Society for the Study of Unexplained Phenomena. Sanderson consulted several aviation experts who explained that the figures perfectly match models of flying aircraft. Similar figurines have been discovered not only in Colombia, but also in Venezuela and Peru. But why did they design them so specifically? And if they existed, where did all these planes go? Jungles have been a massive source of information and mysteries of our planet, but there's a lot more research necessary before we can feel we've actually learned it all, and we don't even know if that's actually possible. Scientists have discovered that mysterious mounds in the southwest corner of the Amazon basin were once the site of ancient urban settlements. Beginning somewhere around 1,500 years ago, ancient Amazonians built and lived in densely populated centers surrounded by kilometers of elevated roadways. The complexity of these settlements is mind-boggling, according to team member Heiko Prumers, an archaeologist with the German Archaeological Institute in Berlin. Jonas Gregorio de Souza, an archaeologist at Barcelona's Pompeu Fabra University, also added that this was the first clear evidence of urban societies in this part of the Amazon basin.